Welcome to the Tech Savvy Professor podcast. Two faculty who love tech and love making it part of their work. I'm Marty Gensius, an associate professor at Kent State University.
I'm Eric Perry, clinical faculty at Southern New Hampshire University.
So, Eric, how was your week? I was waiting to hear and get an email or a picture of the new tablet that you bought. What happened?
Yeah, I like it. I think it's nice. So I talked a little bit about needing to swap it out. So I swapped from one of the A models to the S7, which is about a year behind now in terms of the model. A lot more responsive, feels a lot more sturdy than kind of the A series. Really liked it and just got the keyboard case in and, started doing some grading and stuff on it. So really liked it. I don't have it physically in front of me at the moment because it's also been commandeered for its use for Roblox. So if anybody's curious and wants to play Roblox on it, it works quite well. My 12-year-old is using it now and used it the past couple of days and loves it.
So the screen size on this?
12.
12. Okay.
12.3 right. Is I think what it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's a S7.
Yeah, S7 Plus.
S7 Plus. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I they love it. I think it's going to end up being the Christmas gift this year. Either
for you or for your daughter.
It's yet to be decided, I guess. Yeah.
Well, not much new on this end except getting ready for classes and all that goes on with that. Your semester is a little bit different than my semester arrangement, so I'm on the thick of things. We start classes on Monday, and so it's a lot of class prep, a lot of student email coming in now wanting adjustments, corrections, changes, asking questions that I'm sure are really relevant to them. But at this moment in my life, I've got some other things I've got to get done. So I balance between going through emails and then getting back to the work that I know needs to be done, including this podcast. We were going to talk about webcams. And so I'm curious about what you use webcams for.
Yeah, you talked about just our schedules being different. I teach on a more rolling schedule. So we're 10 weeks on, week off all year round. So most of my teaching is virtual, aside from our clinicals, our skill-based courses that, portions of those happen on ground. So I use it a lot. I use a lot of course announcements, discussions. I use it a lot for recording lectures and, working on right now a lecture series for the research course that I teach quite a bit and was just looking into upgrading what I have and what might be out there. So I thought it was a really timely discussion. How about you, Marty? What uses?
I primarily use it for Zoom meetings. I'm on two projects right now that involve video capture and video editing, and it doesn't involve me being in the video. So I have a nice, crisp, clear video that comes from mine, but I turn it off because it's essentially capturing two other people having a conversation. And I only wish that they had better cameras and better microphones. I'm using it for that. I've thought about doing some live streaming at some point, but primarily it's for meetings that I use it for. So let's talk about what webcams are and what some of the specs are, because some of our listeners already have a webcam in their laptop. Some of them might have external webcams, but let's talk about the specs around them. So why don't you share a little bit about pixel lines that are involved and numbers that are involved, what that means?
Yeah, I think you can get really in the weeds with it. But there's a couple of things I think that's helpful just in understanding what some of the numbers that are floating around there mean. We'll start with resolution. So resolution is essentially the size or aspect ratio of the picture that your webcam picks up, right? So that's measured in lines and columns. So one of the more common ones you'll see is 720p, right? Or 1080p. 720p, for example, has 720 lines and 1,280 columns that pixels are arranged in. And the more lines and columns you have, the more pixel density you have, the clearer your picture, or the better your picture comes out. That also means bigger files generally as they start to go up. So something like 4K, which we hear a lot about now, or even 8K, is 4,000 lines or 8,000 lines. So, as you start to move up that ladder, you get a clearer and clearer picture and potentially a bigger and bigger file. The other thing we look at is frame rate, right? Or frames per second is the measure that you'll see out there. Some of the older webcams you'll see will have 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second. And that's really just the number of pictures it takes per second that it's going to use to display that image. So as you start to get up there into 30 and 60, you're going to see less blur when there's motion on the screen, right? So it handles motion a lot better the higher those frames per second are. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go forward, just how that's helpful and what you might need. You might not need 60 frames per second and 8K for a video that you're sitting and streaming and talking. But maybe if you're doing sports or you're recording motion or capturing something that's has some action to it, it might be helpful to step those things up.
I've heard that the technology has gone beyond the limitations of what the human eye is. So does it really matter that you have an 8K video or photograph when the human eye can't discern any difference between a 4K and an 8K, essentially?
Right. Well, and the videographer's argument to that is it comes down to processing then. Because when you process the video, you get this higher quality image that you can then, tweak essentially or mess with more and not degrade the quality of the video. But neither of us here are, producing for Marvel. We are Disney. We don't really need that for our work. But, if you're a videophile and you really want to get into it, that's definitely something you can walk into.
Yeah. The other thing I think is size, because I produce these things and they are essentially coming off a feed that I'm getting. And for giggles, I will save it at 4K and realize suddenly I have a 5 gig file to mess with, and it's much more unwieldy to deal with. And then when I try to import it and do some things with it, it goes beyond what the actual use is going to be. No one's going to be necessarily watching it on a 4K device. So you got to make decisions around, if you're processing these kinds of video and audio, how much compression you need to put in it to make the file manageable for you, but retain some of the qualities with it. The other thing is, most of the stuff we're using, most of the services we're using have limitations. So Zoom can go up to 1080p resolution, but you have to actually switch the video. There's a check that you can put in the video editing section or video standard section that will take it from its standard default of 780p to 1080p. If you want to do that, Teams goes up to 720p. And then there are some streaming services. I've got an account with them, but haven't found a use for them yet. Ecamm is probably the most popular streaming service. And when you see multiple people in a YouTube video, often they've been captured using Ecamm. And so if you've got people with really good equipment, really good cameras, really good microphones, Ecamm can work at 540p, that's real low resolution, 720, and 1080. And that, I think, is the free account. The Live Pro subscription can take you up to 440 or 4K if you want to go up to 4K with that kind of resolution. YouTube streams vary from 240p to 4K.
One other thing I wanted to mention, Marty, while you were talking about it, that kind of popped into my head, is if you're working in an LMS, a learning management system like Blackboard, Desire to Learn, Canvas, they all have limitations to those videos. So those of you who are doing this as part of your teaching and you're going to post this somewhere, you need to make sure that your LMS can handle it if you plan on having it in the course, or how you're going to have that live externally somewhere like YouTube or one of the platforms that we talked about here. a lot of times if you're using Teams and you're recording that way and you need to share those, they still share through SharePoint, which, causes some issues. Or you need to use OneDrive or one of those other kind of platforms, and it can be really, really clunky. So you want to watch out for, what the limitations are and where you want this to be housed or live, essentially.
So what camera do you currently use?
So I said I needed an upgrade, right? I was pretty upfront about that, I think, in the beginning. So my camera now it's a little older. It's a C510 Logitech. It's 720p. It's about $45 right now. I think when I bought it, it was maybe 60. It says 30 frames per second, but I don't tend to see that in editing much. But that's the one that's sitting on my monitor. That's what I use for most meetings and most of my lecture recordings and stuff now. So I do have a GoPro Hero 8 that I use for, different things I've used for conferences and when I'm on location and need to move the camera around. That one is 4K, functions a little bit better at 1080p. Functions are pretty low end on that one. There's not a whole lot of bells and whistles to that outside the software. I think I need to mention my phone. My phone probably has the best camera of anything I have in the vicinity, in my desk, and my whole kit here. I have right now a Samsung S23 Plus. It has a whole suite of cameras. Can record at 8K, 30 frames per second, and then 4K at 60 frames per second. And then full HD, it goes up from there. It's really impressive in terms of the video quality and everything like that. It's just, for me, has never been the easiest thing to use to record. But honestly, the more I talk about it, the more I think I should probably try it out. What about you, Marty? What's on your desk?
Well, I was involved in doing some video where I needed multiple cameras all being processed through one laptop, and was using a piece of software that I think is still out there called Miro, and was able to have, with extensions, able to have multiple cameras. So I bought a bunch of Logitech 920s, and those are, you can get them up to 1080p, and then they also have HD at 30 frames per second. The other thing you want to concern yourself is how wide of a view that you want. They have a 78-degree wide angle view, HD autofocus, auto light connection or automatic light determination connection in them, dual microphones for if you're going to be using those for a purpose. So I've got a couple of those that now sit pretty much in a drawer, unless I have to go out and do some work similar to that. I purchased a Logitech Brio. It is now currently $149 on Amazon. It's up to 4K Ultra HD, and it has frame rates up to 90 frames per second and a 90-degree diagonal field of view. And it's really a quite crisp and clear, good camera. If you're looking for a camera to plug in to your computer and your monitor doesn't have it, that is now at my office, because I've got a Mac Mini at my office that I put in, and a monitor without a webcam on it. So I now use that if I have to do webcamming from my office. I'd like to say that I have a $1,500 webcam, an Apple Studio display. And listeners can't see this, but this is what Eric is seeing me through whenever we do our work together. The Studio display has a 12 megapixel camera and a 122-degree field of view, so a very wide field of view if you need it. A f2.4 aperture, and then it has some things called that go along with Apple products called center stage. The idea that if I'm sitting here solo, you're getting me, but if somebody walks into the frame, then the camera automatically moves to center us together in the frame and makes that kind of adjustment. And it works with, sometimes I find that real irritating, because if I lean to the left on my elbow and the camera moves, it also moves into the field of view where I have my pile of dirty laundry on the floor. So I generally keep my frame off of center stage so I know what's in my surroundings behind me. It's a good base camera for what I'm doing. And you can like Eric had spoken about, you can also add your cell phone in as a camera. And I've got an iPhone 14 Pro Max, has a 48 megapixel rear camera. Belkin has these little MagSafe clips that you can put on the phone, and then you can stick it on top of your monitor if you don't have one, and then use your phone as a monitor. I've used my phone for web streaming when I need to show something on my desktop. I'll switch cameras to the phone to do it. But Belkin has these neat little things, and that can be helpful if you have a poor webcam and you're going someplace and you know you got to do a lot of webcam meetings. It gives you a better quality, not only video, but sound that goes through the system. I've got a MacBook with an M2 processor in it, and all the current MacBooks now do 1080p in resolution. So bringing the Belkin along or hooking up my phone really doesn't help much, particularly if it's being compressed through the bottleneck of whatever service I'm using at the time. So that's what I've got. I think you've got a wish list coming up.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have anybody from Insta360 that listens, but if they do, I'd love to test the Insta360 link. It's a webcam that essentially is made for lectures. It's made for teaching and instruction, which I think is really cool. It has the AI tracking features that Marty was talking about, which I think are fantastic. And it allows gestures. So you can use hand gestures to have it zoom in on things on your desk or a whiteboard or something like that. Marty just gave me a big thumbs up. It has HDR, all this, it's really feature rich. 4K and about $300. So a little bit on the pricey side, but I think something that would be really neat to try out.
One other thing I'll mention, we'll talk about it at another show because we had a conversation briefly about it. There's an app called which is MMHMM. And it's an interesting app that will add in a lot of functionality to whatever you're doing with web streaming. And some of the functions that you mentioned in the Insta360 can be part of that too. So we'll talk about that app. I'll talk about it sometime separately because I got in on their beta early and have been on and off playing with it as an addition for bells and whistles that I want. Anything, suggestions, kind of the final package that we can tell listeners if you're looking for a webcam, these are the kind of things that you should pay attention to or not pay attention to.
I think we covered a lot of them, right? Really be knowledgeable about what your limitations are and what you're using. That can help control some of the cost in what you're looking for. Think about the types of things that you want to do, the features that you need. Are you lecturing? Are you doing more recording? You may want to spend more on your sound if you're doing more podcasting than you are video. So it can really help just to know what the limitations of the softwares that you're using are going to be and what those uses are. Because you can spend as much as you like for some of those higher tier options that you may not be able to use or may not benefit the people who are watching it. So, those are really the big things. Keep those things in mind and, reference the podcast if you have questions about what to look for in terms of frames per second or resolution and those types of things.
Yeah. And of course, always, if you have a question, you can contact us. I think we are talking about our next episode being on yours and my ever-ending search for the perfect calendar app. And I think we're going to be a two-parter on that, where we'll talk about what apps we've searched for. And then the second part will be what have we landed on that works for us with our particular situation. So how can listeners get involved? Got a tech question, trying to figure out how to do something with technology, have an idea to share? Well, email us at thepodtalknetwork@gmail.com or call and leave a message at 330-333-1240. And we'll play your question in the podcast and try and get an answer to you. Our bumper music is from Philip Gross, Rast, from the Free Music Archive. That's it for today. Thanks for subscribing to the Tech Savvy Professor podcast. You can find us by searching Apple Podcasts for the Tech Savvy Professor. Look for us on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play Music, and other sources of podcasts. Look also for our other shows, particularly Circular Firing Squad at thepodtalk.net. Thanks for listening to The Tech Savvy Professor.